But I can't wait to hear about not only AFVentures, but the amazing realm of how you have been helping in that venture space. Jason, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Trigger, and just deeply humbled and honored to be with everybody here today. I'm going to try to present some slides as I talk, but as I do, the conversation that was just happening, how do we leverage and work with all of these great partners across the ecosystem within AFWERX, and what does that mean with different stakeholder groups? And how do we kind of partition that or develop competency and skill sets within AFWERX to work with these groups? And what AFVentures exists to do is work with startups, small businesses, and the private investment community to find better ways to leverage this incredible commercially derived focused technology development efforts to better help our women and men in arms, our guardian and our airmen. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share a screen here. So hopefully everybody can see this. And I apologize for being in the PDF mode here, but we're gonna do the best we can. So the HASC Future of Defense report from 2020 last year highlighted a number of efforts that are ongoing within the innovation ecosystem. And the House Armed Service Committee, talked about organizations like the Defense Innovation Unit or AFWERX or Kessel Run, and the ability for these organizations to work with the private sector, work with kind of the non-traditional innovation base or the national security innovation base that the 2018 NDS talks about in great detail. But it pointed out specifically AFVentures as a mechanism by which we attract greater private sector investment into defense technologies. And the critical nature of this quote, and the thing that I like to use when I talk about AFVentures is its effectiveness in rebalancing the national security innovation ecosystem. What does that even mean? When we talk about rebalancing the national security innovation ecosystem, what is the innovation ecosystem? Well, today you heard a lot from different members of AFWERX about different aspects of the organization and what they're doing to get after the national security innovation ecosystem, bringing together our partners from across the Department of the Air Force to rethink how do we innovate to better operate our mission systems to be able to better achieve our objectives as a space and Air Force. Well, our job at AFVentures is to do what this quote tells us to do, is to leverage and work with the private sector capital base, meaning both the private capital providers with venture capital, specifically as a primary mechanism to fund R&D in the private sector, in the non-defense sector, but also to work with those companies who are spending their own funding, who are bootstrapping, who are leveraging their own technical expertise to bring new R&D products and services to the commercial market and find better ways to leverage and work with and scale those efforts to support Air and Space Force mission needs. But why do we need to do this? Why do we need to rebalance national security innovations ecosystem? Well, there's kind of two prime reasons that we like to talk about at AFVentures. The first is this exponential rise in private for-profit capital for the purposes of research and development. This is kind of the common paradigm that I think many similar organizations like to talk about. The fact that private capital has far outstripped defense spending in the research and development sphere, and has done so for the last 30 or so years, but that growth isn't stopping. In fact, it's actually increasing. Today, it's about 87% of all spending in the R&D space comes from the private sector. The second reason people talk about a little bit less, but we are doing a significant amount of research on, is looking at our traditional partners when it comes to innovation. And when we say innovation, what we're really focusing on at AFVentures is the development of emerging technologies. So the research and development activity that contributes to novel technologies that go on to make markets more efficient. That is the long-form definition of what we consider to be innovation at AFVentures. Internally, consolidation of our traditional partners has decreased the ability for these companies to produce novel innovations to the scale that they were able to produce some 40 years ago. And that's not a knock in any way, shape, or form it is a simple fact of consolidating industrial bases. We've seen this in plenty spaces. We see it in pharmaceuticals. We see it in the automotive industry. We certainly see it in the defense industrial base. And working with our partners across the national innovation ecosystem becomes critical when we see, hey, we can't just continue to go to sources of innovation that we used to go to. And we need to be able to find new ways to partner with all this new innovation that's happening outside of the fence line. So the Air Force decided last year to develop a new organization called AFVentures with the vision to transform and empower the 21st century industrial base for defense. So working with the industrial base to transform business models, revenue models, development efforts into those efforts that aren't only pursuing commercial interests or non-defense interests, but also are meeting national security needs. The mission that we have is to leverage commercial technology to deliver better capability faster. We're leveraging this innovation ecosystem in ways where we can actually start to align incentives so that the development efforts that companies pursue start to align with the mission needs that the Air and Space Force has. And today we're going to be spending the rest of the time kind of talking about how we do that. Our approach, in a nutshell, is to incentivize partnerships between technologists, research institutions, customers, end users, and investors to pursue national security interests by matching emerging technology concepts with DAF needs. So critical in this is this word of incentivization. So the United States of America does not have the ability nor desire the ability to centrally manage its innovation. And innovation happens in a decentralized way. If you read some of the work that we've been doing in the research community about our approach to innovation, which just like Spark and just like Prime is really bottoms up driven. Innovation happens on the ground. It happens with innovators. It happens with new companies developing new technologies from the ideas, their experiences, their shared context around the technologies and the demand that they're seeing for these novel technologies from the commercial sector and now from the Department of the Air Force. And so incentivization focuses on how do we align these novel innovations as they matriculate and grow and expand to not only meet the needs of the commercial markets, but we incentivize those commercial innovators to want to work with the Department of the Air Force in new and really scalable ways. And the way that we do that is through this three-pronged strategy. So the way that AFVentures operates is through this three-pronged approach. The first is to develop and manage an easy-to-use open front door for innovative ideas. And again, AFVentures, we're focused on technology. We have this outward industrial-based focus. When we say new ideas, we really mean new technology concepts that are in some stage of research, development, test, and evaluation, where the companies can pitch these ideas with where startups and small businesses can pitch ideas to us, to AFVentures, for review, for feedback, and more importantly, for the companies for funding. And so what we do is we take in about 1,000 of these new ideas every year. We fund them for $50,000 to develop these concepts, these ideas into feasible prototype projects that the companies can then pitch for a future stage of funding. And in that next stage of funding, if those concepts and those ideas matriculate into something where we see an opportunity to leverage both the technology for commercial uses, but also for Air Force uses and Space Force uses, then we're going to advance that company into a second stage, into a prototype development stage, where they're going to start to develop the technology itself. And then through that development effort, we're going to find out whether there's a there there, whether there's a tangible product or service that can be developed off of the back of the RDT&E that we're funding throughout the AFVentures model. And when I say we, AFVentures is an investment organization. So we invest in ideas and we help those ideas matriculate into technologies and then hopefully products and services that the Air and Space Force is going to rely on and use in daily operations. But we, as AFVentures, don't make the direct decisions. We bring in partners from Spark, from the rest of the Department of the Air Force, from the rest of the Department of Defense, to evaluate these ideas, to see whether or not these ideas have the opportunity to grow and transition. But our whole program is not just about evaluating the technology concepts, but it's about evaluating the market accessibility and the potential for market growth. And when I say market growth, I mean working with Air and Space Force customers. At the end of the day, if we're not focused on this concept of transition, of getting the technology from an idea to transition, then we're not doing our job at AFVentures. We're not investing the Air and Space Force's funding in ways that can advance technologies from the commercial sector into usable products and services for the Department of the Air Force. And that's where we really have our first step in this strategy for aligning incentives. Because the incentive for us isn't to do non-recurring investments in research and development, test or evaluation. The incentive for us is to do that work with you, the company, to get to you to a place where you are working with the actual customer, the end user, the buyer of the technology after you go through RDT&E. And that's a fundamental change to the program that you may have seen in yesteryear. We attach the customer anytime after these new ideas come in. If there's a follow-on funding from that first $50,000 funding, and it advances to a larger dollar amount prototype activity, you, the company, are going to be working directly with the customer. You're also going to be working with the scientist and engineer. You're going to be working with the end user, but you're going to be working with the customer. There's going to be a pathway, at least for one market vertical, that you can scale your idea into if it's successful going through the process. But the next step is knowing that this doesn't stop there, that $1 million prototype isn't always going to be what it takes to get the next hypersonic aircraft or satellite constellation into space. We know that we need additional funding. And so we partnered with a lot of great partners across the federal government, especially the Small Business Administration, to generate opportunities where we can do large dollar contracts. So we're going to affordably scale ideas by project-based co-investment. And here's where we really start to align incentives from not only a development perspective, but from a funding perspective. In our next stage, we have opportunities. The opportunities I'm going to be talking about in the next discussion that I give in about 45 minutes. Programs like the Tactical Fund Increase Program or the Strategic Fund Increase Program. We're going to be able to take these ideas from a prototype development effort all the way through a full-on system-level development, test and evaluation to get a concept from a novel idea through a scalable system, which is truly a fundamental change. Now, what does that take? It takes capital. We know it takes capital. So these programs are going to be able to award $15 million of SBIR funding or $45 million of total government funding to do these large scope contracts, but it requires matched funding. It requires matched funding from multiple sources. So there's different opportunities that you can pursue, and I'll talk more about this again in a few minutes by the next discussion. But what does this really allow us to do? It allows us to bring additional funding to the table, allows us to work directly with venture capital providers. So we can match private capital. And as a government, we can match private capital at scale as a government organization. So we just recently did a StratFi award for $60 million, where $30 million of that funding came from venture capital and $30 million came from the government. $15 million coming from us and $15 million coming from the customer. The customer is now bringing their own funding to the table in the second stage of our strategy. But it doesn't just require venture capital. And sometimes we don't need to work with necessarily private sources of funding. Sometimes all that funding can come from the government. And there are opportunities there. There's going to be future StratFis that are coming down the pike where we're going to be bringing in $15 million of SBIR funding. And the customer is going to match with $30 million of their own funding for a $45 million government contract. But we also know that sometimes these companies need to scale and scale in ways that don't require research and development contracts to get them to a procurement contract. Sometimes companies are going to be in their growth trajectories only wanting to do 10% of their business with the Department of the Air Force or 20% of the business with the Department of the Air Force, but they provide a critical capability to national security. So how can we think of new and innovative ways to help extend their development efforts? So we've got a team at AFVentures that's thinking of new financial instruments to help grow dual-use companies. Dual-use companies have national security interest where they need growth capital to help build capacity, to help scale emerging technologies farther downstream and farther upstream in the process to be able to build out a resilient supply chain. So that work is ongoing. It's something that we are dedicated to, and understanding that we don't think we have all of the tools we need today to be able to pursue the needs of tomorrow. Now, I like to present this slide at the end of my kind of initial discussion because I like to talk a little bit about where we've been in the past and where are we today. So this slide itself, we produced in May of this year. We just recently did our end of year review. And so we're going to be doing some initial updates to these slides, but in the near future. But since we started in June of 2018, we started developing this whole concept around how do we work and incentivize partners to come to the table to be able to more rapidly acquire and scale technologies that the Air Force needs. We've executed nearly $1 billion in funding just through AFVentures. That funding has gone on to companies who have developed products and services, which have increased the interest from the government to the tune of $2.14 billion of follow-on non-cyber related contracts and $3.5 billion of private follow-on funding. We've worked with over 1,800 companies since inception and made over 3,000 awards to those companies since that time. Companies, based on our investment, have gone on to raise or sell a total of $6.18 worth of products and services for every dollar that we've invested as a cyber program. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. Hopefully that worked. And I want to open it up to any questions that the audience may have.
Think them up. All right. Hey, Jason, awesome. Thank you so incredibly much. Whether you're online, you may be online with the chat. If you have a question, throw it in the chat here in the audience. If you have any questions, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll get a microphone if you don't mind, if I can grab the microphone. Any questions here? Yeah, we have one right down here. If you don't mind running the mic over. And you know, Jason, as you mentioned, one of the things that's hugely important as we get to the question here that's in the audience is we're getting ready to transition into some of the cyber companies that have utilized this process that you guys have seen and used. We got a question right here. I want you to think about this following the question we're getting ready to have is how is it the easiest way for industry to see and utilize what's been created within AFVentures? That's a question to come up. And then I'm going to hand the mic over to somebody who has a question right now for you.
Great talk.
Yeah, it's on for the audience.
Okay. Great talk. Appreciate you. As a venture capitalist myself and a government contractor, how do I go about working with you to either harden capabilities or work together in some capacity? So I represent NATO, a bunch of other government agencies, 3-letter agencies. And so would love to figure out what is the process by which a venture capital firm works with you?
Great question.
No, it's a fantastic question. So the primary way that we work directly together is through this, through our kind of later stage programs. So based upon the authorities that we have today, once a company's in phase 2 with us, once they have that initial prototype, we have the opportunity to do additional funding rounds, essentially. So companies can come and submit capability packages to our team that monitors this part of the portfolio. They manage the later stage funding part of our portfolio at AFVentures. And in those capability packages, companies can submit a desire for additional funding to pursue additional development efforts off the base of their phase 2, where we will actually directly co-invest with private sources of funding. So we ask for you to engage with us through that process specifically. So if there's a company that has a phase, this is going to go into triggers kind of following question, but if there's a company that has a phase 2 with us directly today, they're eligible for this program. So you can work directly with them to say, hey, what are the additional development efforts that you need to be able to do that can help further your ability to transition a capability to the Air and Space Forces, which is what we care about, and develop the roadmap, do the R&D for your product development roadmap on the commercial side. And we've seen a great success in that, in kind of working through that partnership modality. Now,
yeah, I think we have a follow-up real quick. Go ahead and finish, Jason, then he had a follow-up question.
I love that. Thank you for explaining. Just a quick follow-up on a cost plus versus a COTS product, right? So if you're doing SBIR, is that a cost plus model where the agency or the government then owns the IP? Or is that more of a COTS solution and the IP is owned by the VC or the startup? Or how does that work?
So it's a great question. So cyber is a super unique program. So if you're not familiar with SBIR, it's a class of data rights that are granted to a company through the SBIR program. So the SBIR website kind of goes into super great detail about all of this, but essentially it's company-owned data rights for everything that's developed under the SBIR program for 20 years after the development contract. So I would highly recommend, if you're not familiar with the program, going to check it out. The SBA, the Small Business Administration, who really governs the SBIR program. There's 11 government departments have SBIR programs, right? Every service has an SBIR program. They all fall into the same data rights clauses. The other thing that I would highly recommend and put a foot stomp in for is if you go to our website and you go to the events page, AFVentures puts on weekly events, and we have a long schedule of those events that talk through all of these. So we have one on SBIR data rights. We've got one on phase 3 contracts, which is this really interesting contracting vehicle approach that you can take if you are a recipient of a phase 1 or phase 2 SBIR that are built on the SBIR unique data rights. And we also have this opportunity where how we can work directly with venture capital. As far as cost plus versus fixed fee, we have a very structured approach. So we have purchase orders, firm fixed price contracts is typically what we rely on, but we also do other transactions. So when we match funding with private capital, we actually do an OT approach with the milestone-based awards for firm fixed price kind of a methodology. But we put the private funding on contract. And essentially what we say is we make an agreement. We say, look, if you bring the private capital to bear, we'll put the money on this contract. And that's an arrangement that we will make actually in the discussion around the specific technology and development effort that we're going to be funding through this arrangement.
Awesome. Great question. Hey, Jason, we have one coming in from online from the chat. It says, is the DoD trusted capital market going to take more of a role in AFVentures, also known as become more of a true networking tool as opposed to just verification?
That's a great question. And I think, to be completely open, there's a lot of changes happening with TCM right now. We do partner very closely with the TCM as of today. They are a fantastic resource from a verification perspective and a fantastic resource for companies who want to be able to navigate kind of trusted capital in a more meaningful way. It's not something that we can provide as an Air Force. It really is an OSD function. So we're excited about that partnership. And certainly as it continues to mature and grow, it's something we'll stay closely tied at the hip with.
Awesome. Any other questions here in the Capital Factory? No, online. Hey, Jason, I got one for you. As in the innovation space, we know at times it can be chaotic. So I'm going to throw a hardball at you if you're ready for that. In this space, as you've worked in the AFVentures and you've really done so much to be able to grow as you work with entities and organizations in phase 1 and phase 2, phase 3, would you mind just talking a little bit about some of the greatest challenges you've seen and what AFVentures has done to smooth that process along as it's grown, as it's impacted? Because we both know that the reach and the impact of what's taking place in this venture space with AFVentures is huge and making a massive difference. Would you mind talking to that just a little bit? I threw you an easy ball. There you go.
It's a great question. The AFVentures team is full of hustlers, and I mean that in the most positive light. The amount of time and energy that it takes internal to the government side to be able to do this work at the scale that we're operating at. We're talking about almost 2,000 companies we've worked with through this process, many of which are still working with us, still on contract, nearly 1,000 of them, is incredible. The breadth is incredibly wide. The depth is incredibly long. And I think there's an opportunity space along the way to find and uncover these barriers. And I think some of the key barriers that we've uncovered that I think have attracted the scale that we're operating right now, the fact that squadrons and wings don't have access to research and development funding in general, and be able to decentralize the market to a way where we can discretize mission needs in such a way where we can better align kind of unique expertise on the commercial sector, like development expertise that is very specific to key areas, and align that to specific needs inside of the Air Force. And then where there's great overlap, enterprise scale. But not everything we do has to be a $1 billion industry, right? And a lot of what we do is focus on incremental improvements to specific missions at the squadron level, and then finding opportunities to expand to the wing or to the MAGCOM where there's a good opportunity to do it. That bottoms up level of breaking down those barriers so that our innovators at the edge inside the department, the real market owners, are going to be able to directly interface with the suppliers, today's suppliers and future suppliers. Has been a key area where we've spent a lot of time focusing, because we think it's a great opportunity for airmen, guardians, and companies alike.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to call you Santa Claus, but I tell you, when AFVentures showed up with bringing the gift of market to wings and squadrons, it very much was like Christmas, because it was an opportunity to connect with people who are able to help solve and identify opportunities and technologies to help us solve those problems. So thank you to the Christmas team of AFVentures and what you have done. We do have time for one more question, either here in the audience or online, if there is one. And if there's not one, Jason, I guess I'd wrap up with this thought. What do you see, as you know that there are challenges? And this is one of the beautiful things about AFWERX, is that we know that there's challenges in this process of stepping out into the innovative space and helping to grow a culture and a mindset and a basis of that. What would you see the future to be if you had a moment or an opportunity to really align some pieces right now in the next year? What would you hope happens in the AFVentures space as far as connectivity to our industry partners? What would you hope to see?
So I'm really looking forward to growth with strategics. I think that's a great area for improvement moving forward. We have done a lot of co-investment with our defense primes to date, which is exciting, about $450 million in total, which has been phenomenal. And I see better growth there. I see a great opportunity to partner with additional strategics to be able to bring a combination. It's a whole level of our platform approach, which we've talked about before, bringing all these partners together, working in this spark mentality of this and bringing the ecosystem and building the ecosystem. So I think aligning with strategics. And then the other area I think is moving farther upstream in the supply chain. I think there's an opportunity there to work with companies we're not working with right now, where, whether it's in areas of manufacturing or microelectronics or rare earth, or to be frank, working with the companies who are selling directly to the Air Force right now, but need help in the supply chain. To be able to better access and leverage to scale those companies. So when they're developing tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 supply, that they're also thinking about how this is going to affect the downstream national security mission. And I think that is really an area of growth that we are hyper excited about. It's an area that we think is sorely needed, and we're excited to start increasing our focus on. Yeah.
Real quick, if we had a company that didn't understand what you meant by strategics, could you just help them to understand, what does that actually mean? Like, tangibly, what does that mean to a new company that may be new to this space? What does it mean when you say strategics?
Strategic partners who are going to help you navigate the Department of the Air Force, right? I think, we spend a lot of time at AFWERX trying to lower the barriers to entry. Hey, you don't need to be able to speak Air Force to do business with the Air Force. But I'll tell you, as you continue to grow and you're making a lot of headways, you got to start to learn how to speak Air Force. You can't always, the barriers will come. You're going to be leaving the AFWERX mothership at some point. So how do you navigate that? And then think about integration. Maybe there's a widget you got to integrate on the F-16 or the F-35 or F-22, right? You're not doing that alone and unafraid. You got to work with our strategic partners. And we've got world-beating strategic partners that are producing the best military capabilities the world has ever seen. We want to partner better and continue to grow that partnership, so that when you're working with us, you're working with an opportunity to scale your technology in a meaningful, trusted way with our strategic partners, but also means our other strategic partners, right? I mean, thinking about the large corporations of the world that are there to help companies in their growth trajectories, working in a syndicated role where we're investing not only with VCs, but CVCs, we're investing with private equity partners. So what a strategic partner really does is they help you with your journey and working with us.
Yeah. That's amazing. Jason, thank you so incredibly much for your time. I know here in a little bit, we'll see you back here in a couple panels from here. So thank you so much, Jason Rathje, AFVentures. Again, here, if you're joining us online, stay alive in the chat, because we're seeing your chat. We're seeing the messages. Again, virtually a great way for you to be able to network